Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video view series. We take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website, roll20.net. For this video, I'll be reviewing the D&D 5e sourcebook, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, designed by Wizards of the Coast and adapted by Roll20. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. What is Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft? Well, first of all, if you're like me, you might think, well, Ravenloft is Strahd, it's Barovia, it's the Curse of Strahd. Why do we need another book when we already had Curse of Strahd? And in fact, we just recently got the kind of upgraded version of Curse of Strahd. So and granted, Curse of Strahd's a great adventure, one of the best ones they've done for 5e, but what is this? What I didn't realize was that the Domains of Dread encompass basically a whole series of evil demiplanes that exist in, I believe it's the Shadow Realm, and they all are modeled similarly to Barovia in that they have a central key villain who kind of, through their sheer force of will and their own curse and their tyranny, kind of project all of that into the entire surrounding region. Even though the region has like people in it and they go about their business and everything, but the entire place, it does not exist in a normal space. It is like it's got the magical mists around it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's gothic horror either, although there are a bunch of them that are definitely gothic horror, and there's kind of some overlapping themes there quite a bit, but there's a lot of different ways to do the demiplanes, and Van Richten's includes 17 different domains of dread, and that's just one chapter in this book. It also includes a sample adventure. It includes some new character options, including races, although I believe we're calling them lineages now, and some new subclasses, some new backgrounds. So it's a lot of just great, kind of a little bit of everything, stuff for DMs and stuff for players. Most importantly, what this is if you are interested in horror-themed campaigns, running, whether it's gothic horror or zombie apocalypse or a slasher or, some kind of just creepy, Lovecraftian cosmic horror. If that's your bag, then this needs to be a must-buy because it is absolutely like the definitive source book for horror-themed campaign, and you will find just a wealth of information. There's entire chapters on just tips for running horror campaigns, and it's really fantastic information. If you're not really interested in that, then you're probably not going to get a lot out of this bundle, which, for purposes of Roll20, this is what's included in the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft Roll20 bundle, which is the Compendium, which includes 5 chapters of the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which includes 3 new races / lineages, 2 new backgrounds, 2 new subclasses, and 8 dark gifts. I'll get to dark gifts in a second, but those are special traits that players can take on, which include both positive and negative features and kind of reflect you making like a dark bargain almost with one of these evil entities. It includes the House of Lament adventure, which we're going to be covering that at the end of the review, but I will go ahead and say that this is probably one of my favorite adventures of the ones that have been included in other source books. For example, like Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, Eberron Rising from the Last War, all of those included like sample level 1 adventures. This one is way, way, way better and bigger and more stuff going on than any of those other adventures. I was actually incredibly impressed by the adventure included in here called the House of Lament. We'll cover that near the end. The House of Lament adventure does include one 10-foot grid map with dynamic lighting for subscribers. It's a huge, basically it's a haunted house that's got all these different levels though, and the one map, which I'll show on here, it's technically one map, but it includes what amounts to like 4 different maps kind of put in the same area, although you'll see the map quality is a bit of a bummer. It also includes an interactive seance map, which is really cool. You can actually move the little, what do they call it, planchette thing around, and players can do it that way, which is very immersive. And it includes a player art pack, which includes 24 tokens. We can go ahead and show that right now because it's pretty easy to show, which is, you'll look in your art gallery, and it's a bunch of tokens that use basically just map art from Van Richten's as ready-to-go tokens that you can just drop into whatever game. Also includes 14 non-gridded regional maps, which not every domain of dread is given a map. Some of them are unmappable, I guess, technically, which is always kind of bullshit. But we do get a lot of great region maps, which unfortunately is pretty much the only maps you're going to get for here. But these are pretty cool ideas. If you picture a lot of the cooler maps that are, those cool overland maps that you can use in a lot of these adventures, like, the map of, Chult Tomb of Annihilation or something. These aren't like hexcrawl maps or anything like that, but they're just neat, like, full-on maps that you can really explore and look at and just go wild with. And I'll show a couple of them, but there's 14 of these that cover most of what are the 17 domains of Dread. You get over 130 NPC stat blocks that include token art and handouts all linked together, including what I estimated about 30-ish new monsters that were included in Van Richten's. So they include, I guess, anytime a monster was just mentioned in any of the domains, it's kind of hard to tell which ones got included. Obviously, not everything from the monster manual is here, but that's still, over 100 monsters is a bunch that are included in here. 30 named NPCs with token art. So anytime you've got special figures like, Strahd or Richten himself, those are all, basically anytime there's a named creature, they'll have their own little token ready to go. 15 magic item handouts, some of which have art, some that do not, and then some supplemental handouts from the Dungeon Master's Guide, like rules on madness or things that have already been published in previous, editions of D&D will be included there. So, Van Richten's. We can kind of go a little bit chapter to chapter. I'm going to cover what you get with Roll20, but also since this is a new release, what you're getting just in Van Richten's in general, So the House of Lament is not included as an add-on, at least right now. I know when I reviewed Candlekeep Mysteries, they were not add-ons, and then they became add-ons. So right now, if you want to actually run this, you have to start up a new campaign. Hopefully it will be added eventually as an add-on. But if you buy it, this is what it looks like, basically. If you start a new game with Van Richten's, you'll get a huge kind of folder that has the entire adventure in it, and then you have the actual compendium content, which I'm really glad this is included as journal entries, even though it could be a pain in the butt if you just want to run the adventures and you've got all these journal entries here, because all this information is included in the compendium. But it's really easy to miss where things are in the compendium, because it's just like a search bar basically, and it's kind of hard to remember, like, well, what's the new stuff that got included here. So what got included is all 5 of these chapters. Chapter 1 is basically character focused, and this is what adds all the new character creation content. So you've got the new lineages, the new subclasses, backgrounds, and dark gifts. I like a lot of this stuff. Lineages, like Dampier, if your character wants to be a half vampire, you want to be Blade. Hexblood is if your character is basically descended from hags, and you've got some kind of half hag abilities, including like doing the kind of hag's eye thing as a like arcane eye thing. And Reborn, if you want to be like a, Frankenstein's monster or somebody that's just been resurrected and you've got some kind of unique abilities there. And then subclasses are both really interesting, particularly, there's only 2. It's a Warlock Undead Patron, which you can kind of turn on a like frightening visage. And the College of Spirits Bard, which I really like this College of Spirits Bard because it takes the Bard, which is normally a music-themed class concept, and says, well, what about instead of being music themed, you still have the concept of giving people inspiration, but it's through telling stories, being a storyteller. And there's a really cool, and it front loads it right at 3rd level, where you roll a d12, and that determines which of all these crazy different abilities or features. Some of them are beneficial, and some are like dealing damage. So you can then decide, okay, now that I've got the story, then I'm going to target either a friend, foe, or myself, and expend bardic inspiration that way. It's just really cool, really thematic, and it just looks like it's a really fun subclass and a neat addition. The Warlock one is fine also. I think it's very powerful. I worry that it might be a little bit, Warlock's a popular dip, for example, for, raise your hand if you played a Paladin that had some Warlock in there. And this one has kind of a similar feature where you can gain a turn on like a super form and become more powerful. Like, oh man, yeah, a lot of classes would love to have that. So I like that stuff. I think the most interesting addition here are actually the dark gifts, which is something I did similar with the player secrets for my campaign of Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostbane, which is ongoing right now. Check it every Friday night, live streaming on YouTube, which adds new features that you can either start at level 1 or acquire them by basically making kind of a deal with the devil type situation. And they all have really cool traits where they give you, some kind of good ability, but then if you roll like a 1, whenever you do something, then something bad happens. Like the Gathering Whispers is a good example. If you roll a 1 on an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, which usually, rolling a 1 doesn't really matter on those. It's only the attack roll is a crit fumble. But then something bad happens. So normally you can use your, this one, proficiency bonus for your AC. Or if you roll a 1 on any of those things, then something, you're deafened for 1 minute, or you're frightened of the creature closest to you. It just kind of adds an extra detriment. So it's a really cool, risk reward thing that you get, which I think is thematic. It just adds mechanics to that and makes them, themed towards all these different ones, which is really neat. So I like the Dark Gifts a lot. I think that's a neat idea. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 and 4 are kind of similar in that they offer you basically a whole bunch of tips on how to run horror-themed campaigns. How to broach the different subgenres of horror, how to make sure everybody is comfortable with the horror that you are creating in terms of making it enjoyable for everybody, but still being able to embrace all that horror. Chapter 2 specifically is about creating your own domain of dread, which I do feel it's kind of weird to have that before the sample domains, but I guess they wanted to cover, the how to do the horror stuff first. And then chapter 4 is more specifically about, how to run these campaigns, more about the safety tools, why it's important to have a session 0 and even a post-session chat to talk about, kind of what happened and what worked and what didn't. And then also give some sample horror stuff that DMs can use, like curses, which can be a whole foundation for stories or campaigns, as well as haunted traps, which are specifically events that come up and involve some kind of ghost things happening and can be kind of a freaky cool event without doing just a straight combat encounter with ghosts or something. So those are both really cool. I'm not really going to go over that because it's a lot of just reading and information. But again, if you are running a horror campaign, all of this information is really good to have. And in Roll20, it's really easy to digest because you can just see all of these headings here and be able to click on hyperlinks as you need them. I'll show a little bit more of that when we get into the actual adventure. Chapter 3 is probably the biggest meat and potatoes of this source book, which is describing all of the different domains of dread, which again, going into this, I didn't realize there were all these different domains. I just figure, okay, the domain of, Ravenloft is Strahd, it is Barovia, and in fact, Barovia is only one of the 17 different domains that are listed here. So that gives a lot of it really expands my entire knowledge base of what Ravenloft is and how you can run these domains as basically, dimensions that are horror themed while still being, fantasy, still being D&D. And it does the nice thing of limiting players to a certain realm while still kind of giving them the run of the land, which I think works really, really well for, a tabletop RPG. So Barovia, I think this is the exact same map that we've seen in Curse of Strahd. I don't think it's really changed much, but these are the kind of regional maps you're going to get for, again, most of these. Not all of them, but most of them. Like, for example, Blutspur is a cosmic horror land of, vampire mind flayers with, a god brain and a mountain. There's no map for that because it's just supposed to be this crazy, alien landscape that you can't map, which, all right, fine, but for Roll20 purposes, that sucks. You don't get a map for that. The other ones we don't get maps for is the Carnival, which is the classic, dark, messed up carnival. Although this is really interesting. The Dark Lord for this one is actually the sentient Holy Avenger wielded by, the carnival leader named Nepenthe, which is kind of cool. And then, what is the other one we don't get a map for? No, I think, is it Ekath? Whoops. I believe it's... Yeah, Ekath, because Ekath is the city that's being dreamed up by the Dark Lord. So I don't think there's a proper map for that one. But the rest of them do have maps. So some of them, one of my complaints is that there's too much gothic horror. And I like gothic horror as a genre. I think it works. Obviously, Barovia is a really popular setting. Ravenloft is a popular setting, and I think a lot of people associate Ravenloft with gothic horror, as I did, because I just thought Ravenloft meant Barovia. So I would have been fine with, obviously Barovia is gothic horror, but you end up having a lot of very similar kind of themes. Borka is also basically gothic horror, and so is Dementialu, and so is Rishmulat is very similar. It's like a plague rat world. But a lot of them have the same kind of Dark Lords also, which is a classic like noble or aristocracy person who is perverted and corrupted and thinks that they're just the cock of the walk, and that has kind of reflected in their entire society, sometimes into a really interesting degree, like in Dementialu. Dementialu has a twisted version of Cinderella as the Dark Lord, which is let's see, what is it? The domain. Let's find this one. Cedra de Honor, which is her backstory is literally Cinderella, except it involves a lot of death and murder and horrible lies and all these things. Very much a twisted Grimm's fairy tales. The Grimm's fairy tales are also kind of twisted, and it's a urban domain, and it's still very much that decadent gothic horror. And hers is one where it's everybody has to be dressed up and wearing masks and balls all the time, even if they're scraping for like trash and stuff in between. And anybody who can't keep up their noble pretenses, she like murders outright. So it's very much that concept of nobility and aristocracy taken to the extreme. And it feels like there's a lot of them that are similar to this while being slightly different. Like Morden is all about ghosts. It's almost like a Disney's Haunted Mansion type thing, but it's still he's a lord, and it's a decadence for there. And Borka literally has like two different like feuding, I think it's a brother sister from the same again noble family that are at each other's throats. So, but there are some really cool interesting ones as well. And I'm going to spend a little more time on here because I thought this was the most interesting chapter. I believe it was Falcovinia is literally a zombie apocalypse that's like military themed. So it's kind of like in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, and the Dark Lord is Vladiska Drakov, who is a just military commander, and the military has this whole place under like lockdown. However, every like month it is invaded by a giant just zombie apocalypse. So like the military is the only thing keeping this place alive, but also they like horribly subjugate and they conscript everybody, and it's just all the domains are basically bad in certain ways. But this one felt like, okay, this does not feel like gothic horror. This feels like straight up we're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. We're still in fantasy realm though. And we've got this super like militaristic, totalitarianism theme. You can see all the hallmarks. Kind of is like a checkbox of, what kind of themes will you find in this area. Harakir is the classic like mummy / Arabian Nights, desert themed map. You can check that one out real quick. One of them is if you're a fan of like battle royales, or specifically not necessarily Fortnite, but Hunger Games. Valachin is essentially a jungle that very much you're not parachuting in or anything like Fortnite, but you start off essentially at a lodge, and it's the most dangerous game. Like the hunter is a were-tiger, and she unleashes this. There's this big ritual where people just try to run to one of the two different shrines in order to survive and escape. And of course there's a whole bunch of monsters and shit that's prowling and hunting you. It's very much that like slasher and running through the jungle type thing. Which is a really, really neat concept. And all of these, were given a lot of detail on, who are the people, who are the major characters, what are the different events, give me some adventure hook ideas, and especially let me know about the Dark Lords, which there's always, except for one, which actually doesn't have a Dark Lord. I think it was a Lich that managed to escape or something, and there's 3 different kind of mini-bosses that are all vying for control. I believe that's in Darkon. But otherwise, all of them have Dark Lords that have their own role-playing notes, and it's a lot of really, really great information that goes into their backstory, what they're doing, kind of what their curses are, their torments. It really is amazing from a DM standpoint to be able to get to know, okay, I know this villain very, very well, and I know how they would run their domain, and then all the things that happen in this domain. It's just, you don't get the maps, you don't get everything you need for one domain. Instead, it's just an overview of all the different domains, which is still really, really cool and should give you a lot of great ideas. One major complaint I have, though, is that all of these Dark Lords are supposed to be, the bosses of their own realm, but their stat blocks don't reflect that at all. Instead, they just use normal stat blocks. For example, the what is her name? Shukana or something is just a were-tiger, and she's just a normal were-tiger, which is a, what is it, CR4. And it's supposed to be like the big boss, and she doesn't even have, they don't get even extra like layer actions or anything special or anything like that. It's just, and a lot of them are like that. It's like you are, this person is a noble, or they're a wraith, or the most impressive one I think is a mummy lord, which is the literal Arabian Nights one in Harakir. one of them is a were-rat. It's the noblewoman of what was the plague one? Rishmulo. She's just a were-rat, Jacqueline, and were-rats are CR2, and she's like the boss. So I get that you're supposed to run a lot of these characters from a role-playing standpoint, and the fact that they have, it's more Doctor Doom versus, I don't know, what's like Abomination or something. It's somebody who has resources, somebody who's got minions, and they've got all these villainous schemes. But still, Doctor Doom isn't a CR2. Like, that dude can take on, the Fantastic Four by himself, no problem. And he's actually one of the strongest, probably, people in the Marvel Universe. That is not the case here. And I get that, some of these are supposed to be more role-playing than others, but come on, D&D, you're still basically a combat simulator, a miniatures war game that is masquerading as a role-playing game. And at least from my point of view, I'm always thinking of, the end game is always a big boss fight, right? Like, you can have some cool story stuff along the way and all that neat role playing, but at the end you want to have a big boss fight. And none of these Dark Lords, with the exception of like maybe the Mummy Lord, and maybe the Godbrain. I don't even think the Godbrain had a stat block. I think it was just a place. But they weren't, and Strahd, I guess, is there at a CR, whatever he has, 13. As of his vampire stat block, they're not very impressive. They don't get their own cool stat blocks. And I was I wasn't expecting necessarily like, end game, demon lords or anything like that, like CR15s or CR20s, but at least give me some tier 3, like cool high level stat blocks with some neat like layer actions that they can do, because they should be able to break the rules. They're kind of in charge, although they're also tormented by their own domain. So that's definitely a disappointment. And if you were looking for cool stat blocks on a lot of these villains, they're literally just a bunch of regular stat blocks. Now, that's the only thing. Like, the rest of it is really, really great information. There's probably one of my favorites is Mordia, which is just a like steampunk, like kind of half frost themed, where it's very much a Dr. Frankenstein. There's misshapen mutants that can be created, and there's golems and homunculi, and it's even run by very much a Dr. Mordenheim is the person here. Who is creating all these creations, and just really cool map. And you can see there's some different styles with these maps too. Like these look like parchment maps, and then others will look like more of the Barovia map, which would be something you could actually see yourself, wandering. Like this one is definitely like kind of that same art style. So you'll find different kind of styles for different maps, but all of them look nice. I do kind of wish they were a little bit bigger. Like actually, this is 100% right here. A little bit more stretching across the map to where you have to kind of scroll by and everything, but it's probably good enough quality, I think, overall. So that's just Chapter 3. We kind of mentioned Chapter 4 already, and then Chapter 5 is just covering the monsters, which there are, it really just covers the new monsters, which we'll get into that as we cover the adventure, because I do want to get to the adventure, which is the House of Lament. So you can see all these nice full color, regional maps, which don't... I think this part might work in terms of the scaling. Let's see, 10 miles. Yeah, so you can see right there, you can actually have the ruler on there, and it does say the correct mileage, but otherwise, obviously, there's no, grids or graphs or thing on here. So the one grid battle map we have is for the adventure, which is the House of Lament. Now, I want to say I love this adventure. I think it's great, but the map sucks. And unfortunately, this is kind of a running theme when it comes to a lot of these D&D books, is we don't get good maps, and this one is not a good map. It's not a good map. But if you look at it, this is a gigantic haunted house. When I think of these sample level 1 adventures, I think of those little ones from Ravnica and Eberron, and I think Xanathar's even had one where you were in like the fishbowl, where they were just mini level 1, like one-shot session adventures. That is not what this is. This is like a level 1 through 3 mini adventure. It all takes place inside a single haunted house. That part is true. But this haunted house is over 30 rooms. It is 3 full stories plus a basement. It's gigantic. It's a 10-foot scale map. It's got a wonderful mix of role-playing, combat, and exploration. There's NPC investigators you can meet right at the beginning, which could include Richten and his ghost son, Erasmus. There's a neat backstory between this knight who came charging in to try to liberate these lands from a villainous warlord who was killing people and bricking them up in his fortress. and she made a dark bargain with somebody in order to kill him, and she was able to kill him, but then she was cursed in the process. So there's these interesting, like, two warring ghost factions. And there's also just, like, the woman who was also in the house with her children before bad things happened. So there's actually 3 different storylines going on that players can kind of pursue and expand on, all through the use of a really neat seance thing, which is centered around what the NPC investigators help do. And every time you complete a seance, you're basically leveling up, you're contacting with those NPCs. And the way the adventure is structured is you can basically contact any one of those 3 entities, either the Dalk Dranzorg, which is a funny name for the warlord, Mara Silvra, or Theodora Halvrist, and then kind of go along there. Basically, you get quests from them, and it's very similar worked with I picture the Stranger Things, with the lights going off and the RUN and stuff. And here you can use that with the seance, and they literally, give the players, you can see here, help under porch. And that tells the players, go back under the porch, search there, and you'll find, like, his Berserker axe. So it's a really neat, like, way to give people quests through the use of these seances. And, of course, the whole house is haunted. There's just weird stuff going on. There's very classic tropes of, statues coming to life, portraits coming to life. There's ghost kids. There's all those new haunted traps to avoid. There's a chimney witch, which can, there's basically specters. They use specters and ghosts in cool ways where they kind of give them, like, limited layer actions and let them do different things. Like, one of them is a screaming ghost that sounds like they're falling off the stairs, and then it's basically like a poltergeist that's doing that and can push people down. Just every time you long rest, a person wakes up with a nightmare, and they literally wake up in a different part of the house, which is a really creepy, cool way of, like, separating people. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and I love the use of the seance board. And one thing that Roll20 provides is an interactive seance map, which you can actually move the little planchet thing around for either you or allow your players to do it, although I think the DM is supposed to do it as you kind of move it around and spell out the words that you need. They didn't have to do this. You don't need this to run the adventure. You could just tell people, but it's really cool in Roll20 to be able to go to this map, specifically when you're on the, doing the seance thing, and be able to, like, point people to all these different little letters and concepts on there. I think that's a really neat thing to do. It's really fun. This is all just on the token layer. That's an extra thing that Roll20 provides, and I'm a huge thumbs up to that. As much as the map sucks, I guarantee you'll be able to find somebody that has made this map look much better and probably be able to superimpose it on this map, because you can see all the dynamic lighting is done on here, which means everything is blocked off. You can open and close windows and doors as you need to. I'm not necessarily opposed to having all these different map layers on one map. That might be easier than having to switch maps, but having the 10-foot scale map sucks because, as you can see, some of the tokens are tiny, and especially when you have teeny tiny tokens, those get really, really small, and it can be kind of hard to work them out. But I do really like this dungeon. It does also a good job of showing off the different unique monsters that are included here, like the Death's Heads, which, and by the way, there's a difference whenever the house enters, like, its final, like, third act, which is very classic horror movie, which is shit is just getting really messy, and the whole house is just, The Shining, which is just every, blood coming down from the elevators and all the weirdness happening that's designed to just completely scare the characters at that point, versus the subtlety that existed in the beginning. It is a really good kind of crescendo of that. The Boneless is really creepy. These are the troops by the warlord. Very, very creepy monster there, and some cool art. Again, there's probably a little over 24 of these different monsters, but otherwise it'll use a lot of, classic specters and poltergeists and things. But I do love this adventure. I think it's great despite the bad map. It's long. This would definitely be multiple sessions, and you're supposed to level up to 2 pretty quickly. You kind of explore the first floor, and then they do the seance. Or you explore a few rooms and then do the seance, depending on what timing you want. And then you level up to 2, and then you explore basically most of the rest of the house, and then you're leveling up to 3 when you get to the climax, and then shit is getting really crazy as the house starts coming at you. So this is not just a typical, like, you're level 1 and you're just going through a couple rooms and you're done. This is a much bigger, more involved adventure that's actually going to take multiple sessions and would be a really, really fun adventure to run, but it is not designed to be a one-shot, like, haunted house dungeon crawl, which is what I think which is what I was expecting, frankly, and I think what a lot of people expect. If you are new to Roll20, then you can see the hyperlinks for different enemies are here. Your character sheet all works like it should. I believe it's set up to whisper by default. and do the advantage by default and roll the damage by default. You don't. I rolled a double crit fails, double ones. But everything is already plugged in there, and yes, this is also in the character monster in terms of all the new content. So if you want to build a character and you want to, for example, use the Dampier or use the College of Spirits, then you will need to purchase this in order to be able to use it in the character monster. Or, of course, you can always just add things manually if you wish. But honestly, I think as limited as these are in terms of, you know, how much do I need a source book that's just basically information versus an adventure, which has a lot of maps and tokens that I'm going to need. I will say this one does include, you know, those regional maps, which are very awesome. They're very nice looking. You do have over 100 monster tokens to use, which is great. And I think the information that's included here to be able to have that in the compendium or in your journal is very, very useful as well. So I will say this is probably one of the more impressive of the source books that I've read. And instead of being tied to a specific area like Ravnica or Eberron, you know, the Domains of Dread is designed to pull your players into it. You can really slot them in to any time in your campaign and just have the mists envelop you and you wake up in this area. And that was one of the things in all of the different domains is how do you get your players to that area? You know, how do you know, where do they start? What are the circumstances that they're dropped in there? And that's a big part of that process. So it's a lot easier to use this content, for example, than it is, whereas, you know, in Eberron, you have to run an adventure in Eberron, obviously, or Ravnica, you're running an adventure in Ravnica, whereas here, these domains can be dropped in at different points, and you can run kind of a little mini campaign within a Domain of Dread, which is a really cool prospect. So pretty much thumbs up for me across the board, but with a few complaints, which we will summarize right now by going over my pros and cons for Van Richten's guide to Ravenloft. Pro, new lineages and subclasses are fantastic additions. Yes, I want to play Have Vampire. Yes, I want to tell stories as a bard. The lineage system seems to work pretty well. And the dark gifts, which are a separate pro for me, actually, which are unique starting traits granting new abilities and negative features that make rolling a 1 that much more exciting. I always like that feature. Instead of it having to be, you know, here's this negative thing that always happens or sometimes happens, I think it's smart they tied it to a 1. It's like, man, rolling a 1 sucks anyway, but now it's really going to suck for you. Pro, excellent tips and world building tools for horror-themed campaigns. Basically, all of Chapter 2 and 4 are really helpful suggestions for DMs on not only how to build your horror world, but also how to run horror as a theme, and also how to convey that to your players and make sure they're all on board. Because if you have, you know, players who are just kind of laughing and not taking things seriously, then it's probably not really going to work. So you need to be able to, you know, have that conversation with your players and be able to keep that up, but also, you know, interject levity and comedy and action and you know, all those different emotions in there to really make a good horror story. Pro, 17 Domains of Dread, each with their own rich history, geography, Dark Lords, and adventure seeds. Holy crap, I had no idea there were that many domains, and maybe there's even more than that, I don't know, but I just went over a couple of them, and I thought they were absolutely awesome. Like, I just really excited. I mean, the Zombie Apocalypse one was cool, the Most Dangerous Game one was really neat. The Dark Cinderella one was fun. The Dark Carnival is really cool. Obviously, Barovia is a classic. The Dream World City is neat. I didn't like all of them, which I'll get into that into a con, but there was a lot of really cool, great ideas for using domains in a way that I had always, again, associated with it with Ravenloft and just classic Gothic horror and, you know, vampires and werewolves and shit. Pro, the House of Lament is a multi-session mini-adventure drawing upon classic haunted house tropes and offering a nice blend of exploration, combat, and role-playing. Basically, just huge thumbs up to the included adventure, which is not even fair to call it a level 1 adventure. It's really a level 1 through 3 adventure, which it's not, you know, it's not as big as Lost Mine of Phandelver, but it's not as small as the ones that I would normally expect. It actually is kind of comfortably in the middle, while still all taking place within a single haunted house dungeon crawl, basically. And then final pro, interactive seance board for the House of Lament adventure. That's a really neat thing that Roll20 added, and is very immersive to be able to actually move the thing around and convey that to your players. Cons. None of the Dark Lords are given unique stat blocks or even modified or enhanced stat blocks. That was just very, very odd to me as somebody who always feels the Dark Lord should be, unless they have, you know, an ally with them that is their proxy, you know, villain. Like if you're doing a Wizard of Oz thing and there's a dude behind a curtain, but otherwise, like it should be a final boss fight, like, or at least give them some cool layer actions or some modifications of that basic stat block. Don't just make them like a were rat or a noble or a knight or something. That's just not. They're so interesting. They're built with such rich history and details and role playing notes, and then you just give them a regular stat block. Just doesn't feel fair at all. Con, many of the domains have overlapping themes of Gothic horror and the perversion and corruption of nobility and aristocracy. So specifically, the ones that I wrote down that felt too samey to me were Barovia, Borca, Dementialu, Mordant, and Rishmalu. In terms of the villain is some kind of fallen noble, and the themes are of the perversion of decadence or nobility or aristocracy. It just all felt a little bit samey to me. Yes, one of them is like plague rats. And yes, one of them is like Barovia. One of them is like Haunted Mansion with a lot of ghost stuff happening. But they all just, I guess, maybe it's just, to me, the Gothic horror thing just all feels like the same, even though they're trying to do different versions of Gothic horror. And maybe the problem is we've already have Curse of Strahd, and Gothic horror is such, already a thing that exists in 5e, to where a third of the domains are basically doing different versions of that, of Barovia. But that's only a third of them. 2/3 of them are much different, so I appreciate that. But like, I would have liked one or two more like cosmic horror ones, for example. Would have been interesting. Like one that's just all like tentacles, or one that was a big like had like a ocean theme would have been cool. We're just, I don't know. It's not really, maybe an underground one that was all creepy like Morlocks and things. They don't really go as crazy as I was hoping. It still very much feels, and maybe that's part of the problem with Ravenloft, is it's still classic horror stuff. And I would have thought, well, let's expand that into a few more like interesting areas or regions. And then final con is, of course, the map for House of Lament, which is a black and white 10-foot scale graph map, which is just ugly and doesn't look good and is a huge shame, because otherwise the adventure is fantastic. Final verdict. With helpful tips, detailed dread domains, and a legitimately great low-level adventure, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is the definitive 5e sourcebook for running horror-themed campaigns. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at rogue20.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. You can support my work at patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard Princess, Christopher, Star Loverly, Thomas, Ian, Captain Mike, Adam, Goblinworks, Aiden, and Instant Lose. And gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos Dade, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Ross, Limpius Buds, Jerome, Fatboy 619, Glenny, Nick, Barney McButterpants, Blood Angel, Veronis, The Fireworks Factory, Baboon, Sean, AK, Cert2B, Nathan, and Fast Like a Tortoise. Thank you all very much for your support.